here, right? So I'm going to go into a demo account.
My Angela.
Just so we can walk right through. Okay, so when I started out with my classes, right, I have invited my students. Looks like you guys have already done that. I can do that with a class name. I can also do it by syncing with Google. And I'm going to make this a little bigger here so you can see all that. When I'm in here, we just talked about the fact that you can invite co-teachers. When you go into editing students, you can actually download a login sheet so you have a copy of their usernames and passwords. If you're using Google Classroom, you obviously don't need this because whatever their Google login is their login here, right? So this is our first step. We've created some classes, we've managed some classes, we're all set up and good to go. Now, here's our teacher guide. It's pretty simple and straightforward, and I'm going to tell you ignore the order because I think the order is silly. We're going to be updating this soon. The first one, obviously, create a classroom, add students. Now, before we get to the featured activity packs, I think the most important thing is the entry diagnostic. Give me a yes if you have used the diagnostic with your students.
Some of us have, some of us haven't, but that was definitely an area of interest.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So I have pretty strong feelings about the diagnostic. There are two types of it. There's the L diagnostic and the sentence structure diagnostic. Now, they're not hugely different. And the reason for that is what Quill tries to do with the diagnostic is target the skills that students need to tackle any complex sentence, right? So no matter what your areas of language need are, there are certain skills that you need to be able to tackle complex sentences. So if I'm dealing with either a student with special needs or an L student, I'm going to start them off with the L diagnostic because it's going to bring them back to a few slightly more foundational skills that they will need to be successful. If I think my students need things before that, I might build an activity pack that's just based on grammar activities. And I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. But for the most part, with my lowest level students, I would have them do the L diagnostic, work through the recommendations, and then do the sentence structure diagnostic. All right, so that's the order. If you're working with students who are within a year of grade level, or they're high and amazing, right? Sentence structure diagnostic is where to start, okay? It's 22 questions, and it looks through student writing to figure out which areas they have the highest need. So if I look under my student reports and my diagnostics, I'm getting a little information right off the bat. I'm finding out which of my students are doing what, right? So I can see Charles, I'm a little worried about him. He's struggling a little bit in this diagnostic. And Harper obviously is killing it. So we get a little information here. The next thing I can find out is the areas where students are struggling the most, right? So this is a pretty common thing that we see here, this sentence, listening to music on the ride home. Students have trouble determining if that's a fragment. Right? So this is something to be considering about what we're teaching into as we go, right? Same thing here, laughing quietly. These INGs really trip students up, and that's something that I want to be aware of when I'm working through. So this is just sort of an overall, where are my kids? And then I can move into the recommendations. So what I can see here are all of the different things in blue. I know it's a little hard to see based on the screen. I wonder if I can change. Yeah, so you can see the ones in blue are what we recommend. So Charles, we feel like these are written in sort of in order of what we think needs to happen. Charles, we think needs to go back to compound subjects, objects, and predicates. So we've given him some assignments here. Everyone else, they've done okay with this, with adjectives, adverbs of manner. They're ready to start just at compound sentences and move their way forward from there. Now, I'm the teacher, so I get to make choices. If I want to assign students things that are not, haven't been assigned to them in the past or haven't been recommended, that's fine, right? So maybe I read Harper's writing and I think it's important that she review adjectives, even if she got it right by Quill standards. The same thing here. I don't have to assign everything at the same time. Maybe I want to wait to assign complex sentences until we can do some things together. Okay, so these recommendations are the independent practice recommendations. In these activity packs, you'll find some grammar activities, a lot of Quill Connect, which is sentence combining, and some proofreader activities for students to work on. The other part of Quill, which is new and exciting and beautiful, are the collaborative class lesson recommendations. Now, if you'll notice, these recommendations pretty much go from, they change the order based on the percentage, but you can tell sort of the order in terms of growth, like, easiest to hardest based on what aligns here, right? So when we're looking at compound subjects, objects, and predicates, this pack right here is that one. Now, only 25% of my students need that, right? Because we know Charles needs that. So if I assign this pack, this is something that maybe I'm going to only do with that 25% of students, right? My whole class is working on independent activities. I'm working through a collaborative lesson with Charles and maybe the other 3 kids that make up that 25%. We'll talk through lessons a little bit in a minute, but basically what lessons allow you to do is have discussions and interact with students while they work through these activities rather than sort of sending them off and then just peering over their shoulders to see how they're doing. Right. So the other thing I can see, though, is by the time I get up here, right, with 50 to 75 to 100% of my students needing support on these, this is suddenly something that I want to work on as a whole class. Now, I mentioned earlier that we don't expect or think that you should use Quill every single day. What we would prefer overall is that you use Quill 2 or 3 times a week, right? If you're doing lessons, I would say you do no more than 1 lesson a week and no more than 1 follow-up session a week. And the reason for this is just that, like, if I teach 3 different Quill lessons in a week with 3 different skills, chances are kids are not going to retain that, right? They're going to learn the skills, they're going to be really good at it in the moment, and then it's never going to show up in their writing. What I think is most essential for teachers, and one of the things that I am very gradually getting to build out since I joined the team in August, is a bank of things for teachers to figure out how to apply this to their other work. Right? So I imagine you have some ideas right off the bat. You might have tried some things already. What ways can you think of or are you currently using to get kids to take the skills they're using on Quill and use them in the rest of their writing? Any thoughts?
Well, the stuff that you just showed is kind of where I'm at. I don't want to speak for the whole group, but after doing that diagnostic, it was finding where to go next with that. Deciding between individualizing it for students or trying to do whole group lessons. So what you just showed us was really helpful in itself. I don't know if that answers your question, but that was pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely helpful. And then I'm also wondering sort of, are you doing things outside of Quill to, it sounds like you've just started with the diagnostic, but what sort of things could you do outside of Quill to reinforce these Quill skills?
I mean, in their writing itself, coming back to it and going back through, like with the writing that we're doing right now, students have to use everything from figurative language, which really wouldn't be so much Quill, to using commas and its correctly, or there and there correctly, and being able to come back to Quill to maybe use that on Monday and Friday with the writing in between would be a good way for them to make sure that they're editing and proofreading their work for those types of tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you all have your students keep writers' notebooks, either digitally or physically?
Kind of. They have folders where they keep their work that they're writing on, and journal notebooks that they keep it on, if you want to call it that. For me,
okay.
For you.
So one of the most effective strategies I've seen for teachers and students who are using this is for students to, as they go, write down the name of the activity that they're working on and write down an example when they start that activity, right? So combining actions, people, and thing is on there, and then I would write down an example, right? And it would probably be the first sentence that I tried, right? So I'm writing that down because if I'm doing this in a personalized fashion, I want to make sure that I have tracked my skills, right? The other thing here is we're trying to build up some of that student independence with the skills, but they're keeping sort of their own table of contents of the skills they've worked on. Now, Quill's going to always have a record of what activities they've worked on. I think the physical copy is necessary and important because it sort of pulls it away from the computer program and puts it in front of them at another place. What I've seen a few teachers do is turn it into a checklist, right? So now that I have these skills, I just put a checkbox next to them. And when I write my draft and I'm editing my draft of my essay, I go through and check off each one of the Quill skills I've learned that I've edited for, right? So just really, the more you can think about that, and this is, I mean, I'm sure you know, this is true of every ed tech tool and not just Quill. If it exists on just the computer and just in this program, it's a vacuum and it will all disappear into the ether. But if you are spending your time in saying like what you do on Quill matters in the other places where you're writing, students will really sort of take it to heart. And it's been cool to see students really think about that in their writing as we go. So one of the things we talked about is, so we've got, you know, the first step, which is the independent activity. We've got the second step, which is students really thinking about how those things look in their writing on their own. And then this next step here is getting engaged in lessons, right? So if I go back to my diagnostic report, and I say that, you know, I'm going to sort of just help out, right? So we're going to do a lot of independent practice maybe to start out. Kids are going to start working through some things. And I'm just going to go around and be a resource, right? I'm going to check over their shoulders. I'm going to look at their activities when they finish. I can do things like click on their activity analysis and look at the last activity they did, right? So say, I know that a lot of them did this. I'm looking through my students. Everyone seemed to do pretty well here. I'm not so worried about this. I can go back and I can check other activities, right? So let me see. Let me pick a tricky one. No, okay. So with the trickier ones, you'll start to see some student work, and I can show you that in a different way. Once you've got kids started on Quill, it's a great time to begin working on lessons. So I looked through here, we talked about, all right, about 50% of my students need the parallel structure lesson pack. So I'm maybe going to do that with 50%, but we know everyone in the class, or almost everyone, needs these compound sentences. So let's look at one of these lessons. Now, Quill now has the opportunity for you to customize your lesson. I won't go into too many details about that. There's a whole bunch of guides on the website that you can look up and sort of figure out how you want to customize it. Basically, what that means is any slide you see, you can change it so the text mirrors what you want to say. Now, lessons are designed to have 3 views. There's your view. There's what students see on their computer that they can interact with. And then there is the projector view. So if you've never unmirrored your screen, make sure you pay attention to the directions. But basically what this means is what students see should be different from what you see so that students can give their answers and you can decide what to share. Each of the lessons provide both the sort of step-by-step instructions that I really wanted my first year of teaching, and also the option to hide those step-by-step instructions in case you are like I was in my last year of teaching, where I just wanted to read it through and then write my own amazing script because I was so incredible. I hope that you guys can tell it. I'm making really ridiculous jokes over here when you can't see my face. Okay, so if I look here at the teacher model, you can see one of the things that we ask you to do is model for your students, right? So I can change this, right? So maybe instead of our best player, it's Tyreek had an injury and he couldn't play in the final basketball game. Right? So I can change the example right here so that I'm making it more personalized to my class. Now I can, and this is just something you can already personalize, I'm writing out the example. Now you can see that as I write it here, it's showing up in my student view. Did I open up the other one? No, I closed the other view. But it's showing up on my students' page so that they can see what I'm doing there. It'll also show up on the board in front of everyone. So once I've done this, I can say things to my students, and I'm going to ask you guys these questions like, what mistakes did I make in my model? Any mistakes?
No.
No?
When you say the model, you're saying the Tyreek sentence?
Yeah, this one right here. where it says your model.
And punctuation.
Yeah, you need to put a period.
Yeah, I didn't put a period, right? Are there any important details that I maybe left out?
Final basketball game.
Yeah. So one of the things to remind students when they're working on Quill, right? So if you're modeling, for the most part, we try to make it so that kids aren't working to be good at Quill, they're working to be good at writing. But in some ways, we have an algorithm that actually reads each of their sentences and gives them feedback based on similar sentences that we've seen in the past. So one of the things we try to do is have the students keep the details in there and really only change the structure, and except in the cases where like the additional words are redundant. Right? So you can say to students, right, like the sentence that I wrote the first time around wasn't wrong, but it didn't have the same level of description that I was looking for in these two sentences, right? So the model is your opportunity to really talk it through. Now I can move on to the next slide where students can actually type in their answer. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is the sentence that I have here. I'm going to do what my high schoolers love to do. I'm going to type IDK and submit. So as a teacher, I now see that James, my dear, dear student, has typed IDK as his answer. Now we get to use Miss Garrison's favorite button. Suddenly when James looks at his screen, it's blank. And I'll say, hey, James, could you give that another try for me? And James will say, okay, I would love to, right? I'm not going to write out a full complete sentence here, but I would go ahead and submit my response. So go ahead.
I was just wondering if you would be there to hit the recycle button and push that question back to them while they were working in class in real time.
Yeah, so because of the way the lesson is structured, right, what I usually do, and there are a couple options for this, but what I usually do is I have the projector version up, and then I am, standing near-ish to my computer so that I am looking at the screen where their answers are coming in, right? You can see on the student version, their answer is not showing up, or like no one else's answer is showing up. So here on my screen, I can see what's coming in. So I'm glancing at this, or I'm glancing over their shoulders and coming back to look at this. Now I have a few other options here. So I've got James, and I would have my other 15 students' answers here. Now, if I'm worried about James's response, right, I need to remember to go back and chat with him later on. I'm going to flag him because I know that I want to check in with him, and that's just a way to remind myself of that. The other thing I can do is I can select and display. If I had a full class of students, I could select every student in the class. If I had a full group of students and I just wanted to compare 3, I could select 3. When I press display the answers, that's going to show up both on my board and on every student's page. Notice that we number it. We didn't put James's name next to it. Now, if James just wrote like the most beautiful sentence I'd ever read, and knowing James, it was probably a really long and kind of boring sentence, right? But whatever it was he put out there, right? Then I would be able to say, James wrote this really amazing sentence. His answer is number 1. Right? But we don't have to reveal it. Now, of course, every time I've done this with a class, someone's yelled, that's mine, but that's fine. If they want to share it, that's fine. But for the most part, what we want to do is give students the opportunity to have a conversation. So if you look down here in the guide, we start to give you some questions. And here's what's most valuable to me about the lessons is the opportunity to get them to compare, contrast, think about the choices each writer made, and sort of make corrections and ask questions. So that's the real point of lessons. I can see things, they're not being graded so that we don't have to worry about a wrong answer, but there's just the opportunity for students to work through things. Now, one of the cooler things I've heard, and I've heard this now twice, is in classes when teachers have done lessons once or twice and kids find out that retrying is an option, after having the discussion, kids have asked that the teacher allow them all to retry the question so they could submit a better answer. Now, obviously, that's not going to be every student in every situation, but it does mean that in a lot of cases, kids are engaged enough that they care what's submitted in their name. So I work through the lesson. I maybe have students work on some things together and some things separately. I get to the end, and here's where I'm going to switch over to the demo page because you can't actually see this in the sample of Quill lessons. So here we go. Let me make this a little bigger so it's easier to see. So if so this is what it looks like when I have more students. I flagged Margaret. I shared the answers of Maya, Margaret, and Jane. This is what it looks like when I have multiple answers on the page and I can have a conversation. And then here's my last page. I can see every student that I flagged. I can flag and unflag students at this point. At this point, I have a few decisions I can make. I can say, the students I flagged, I know need extra support. So I want them to wait before they start the follow-up activity. I can say, I want all students to start practicing right now. I want them to be pushed immediately into the activity. I want to assign the follow-up, but I know that they have to leave class right now, so we're not going to work on it. Or I can say, no follow-up practice, we're good to go, right? For the small group instruction, if you hit this button, what happens is Maya through Enid here, they're going to get a blue screen that just says, hold tight, your teacher will call you in a second. And I can say, everyone with the blue screen, please come join me at the teacher table. We're going to review a few things so that you can, be successful when you start working. Everyone else will be immediately pushed into a follow-up activity and can start independent practice. So those are just a few things about the lessons. And the reason I go into so much detail there is because I think that lessons is what makes the difference in Quill and student learning, right? If I am getting the opportunity to really go in and to talk about this with my students, I'm across the board, we notice better results from students, okay? So we set up our Quill, we had the kids take the diagnostic, we gave them personalized recommendations, and we started alternating lessons with personalized recommendations so that students are building both skills we know everyone needs and skills that they particularly need. Now, I'm going to show you this one in like a split second so I can spend a few minutes on reports. Is just building your own activity packs. Now, like I said, the things that are assigned by the diagnostic is not everything that exists on Quill. It's just the things we believe they need to get into more complex work. So I would ignore the middle and high school and whatever designations. I think it depends on your class and your students. But you can get in here and you can find some more advanced lessons. You can also find these bright red featured activity packs are focused on content. Right? So all of the activities I work on in the Chinese dynasties pack are going to also build my understanding of Chinese dynasties, right? So there's some interesting stuff you can do helping students have an understanding of writing in the context of certain content, right? So those are the options that you have when you have your students working through these packs. Now, I would say with these packs, they do ask students to work, anything that's, these higher level skills, it's asking students to combine different ideas, right? So not just and or, but so, but also although, because, etc. So we want them to have some strong prerequisites. So once they start those, they're like pretty pumped and able to like make a lot of choices in their writing. I can also create my own activity packs. So say I want to have one that's just all proofreader passages, right? So just all passages that students edit and then get follow-up on. I can click here, I can click on proofreader, and then I can assign them things like the Audrey Hepburn passage where they have to go through and focus on capitalization. Okay, so you can create your own activity packs in addition or as a follow-up after students work through those personalized recommendations. Questions before I move on to reports?
The red packets of advanced or content-related activities, they have little estimated times on them, I see.
Yeah.
If we were to introduce that to a student in a classroom setting, but they wouldn't be able to finish it in that time because you also said it's quite challenging, is that something that it's easy for them to like pick back up elsewhere?
Yeah, so the numbers on that are, I have feelings about those. But what I would say,
go a little long, it seems, but I'm sure that's not accurate.
Yeah, so it says 80 minutes. Basically, what that means is that there are 7 activities. Each one of these activities is entirely individual,
Oh, that's
right?
great.
So when I'm looking at this, right, we're saying we expect it to take 12 minutes per activity for these for each student. Students can, when they do an activity, save and exit halfway through, and most of the time it's pretty easy for them to pick back up where they left off, right? So I would say, like this really depends on the level of your students, what their stamina is for working through these, how long you want to spend on it. I know teachers who do Quill as a 10-minute warm-up every single day, which means that, with login time and whatever else, kids might get through half an activity each day. That's cool. That's great. That is not a huge concern, right? And for these content packs, what you're thinking about is if you're using it alongside having those conversations, or if you're going to have a conversation about the content at some point, those are all, sort of things that you can do. So when you see the amount of time here, this is to complete everything in this activity pack, each of the individual activities. We imagine it will take about this much time.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so here we are in reports. The visual report is always my starting place. It is simple and straightforward. So here's my buddy Charles. Blue will show up for any diagnostics or any lessons that have been completed because those aren't graded, right? So that's just a reminder that you can see the overall scores that he got on this. You can see it even better if it's not zoomed out like that, Garrison. You can see his overall skills, right? And I can see how he's done, but we try not to give percentages on this because we don't want to focus on like, oh, this kid failed, right? And then for the lessons, they're just not graded at all. When I talk to students, I say green means great job, red means ask for help, and yellow means try again. Yellow is 60 to 80, red is below 60, green is above 80. So when students are looking at their dashboard, they can see next to each assignment this color-coded item. So they know whether that's something they need to try again or not. The reason I say red is ask for help is because a lot of times this will suggest like a conceptual misunderstanding. So let me show this activity. These aren't quite as interesting as the Connect, but you can still see submissions. I can scroll through this and see Charles got a 55 and I can see what he did wrong, right? So combine the sentences starting with the appropriate subordinating conjunction. So he tossed after right in the middle of these two sentences, right? So not following directions here and maybe not really understanding what we're looking for in terms of these skills, right? So I can do this activity analysis to figure out what exactly I can do to help Charles in this case. So that's, super helpful in terms of doing that. Obviously, I'm not going to do it with every activity every time, but if I'm looking to diagnose a certain issue, I can absolutely do that. Other things you'll see on this page, kids can always try things again. If they're in progress, you'll see this little Pac-Man in the corner. If they've done it a couple times, you'll see a number in that box. Gray means they haven't started it yet. And then white is if they've started it, but they haven't finished anything yet. We've looked at the activity analysis. We've looked at diagnostics. So now we get into the fun reports. Now, these reports are going to get more fun in probably the next month because I cried and stomped my feet a little bit. And so we're making some cool new reports for you that I'm really excited about. But I'll tell you about what we have so far. The list overview, I call this the nerd overview. If you are someone like me who likes to mess around with Excel spreadsheets, you can download this report as a CSV and you can really go nuts in terms of color coding and organizing and figuring out which things go where. This is your nerd report and you can do whatever you would like with it. The concept reports, I would say, are the ones that teachers find most helpful. When you look at these results by students, this is actually the area I use when I'm grading students. So if we say that most activities are about 10 sentences, I've decided we're going to do 5 activities this marking period, right? Or maybe we're going to do, 5 activities this marking period. That means that I want students to have about 50 correct sentences at the end of the marking period. Now, I don't care how many times they get it wrong, right? Everybody gets questions wrong. They have the chance to go and redo it until they get it right. So when I'm grading, I ignore the incorrect and I just say the correct out of that number, right? So if I know that they had about 50 sentences to do, I can say that I want you to have 50 sentences correct, because you can redo them till you get every sentence correct. So your total score, your total score here is going to be out of whatever the number is, right? So I'm saying everybody's got to have 50 correct sentences. It's the end of the marking period. Charles has 100 sentences correct. Charles is 200% on this, right? Obviously, they've had a few more opportunities, right? So that's what I look at in terms of grading. I really try to focus on correct sentences. Part of that is because I think I want them always working towards correct. The other thing is because this percentage is always going to be a little wonky. Because if we start marking period 2 and Charles gets every sentence correct in marking period 2, Charles is still never going to get to 100% because he's still going to have these lingering incorrect sentences. It's up to you how you grade. My recommendation would be pick a number you want them to get to in terms of correct sentences, make sure they have enough activities to get there, and then use this as your percentage. Questions?
Nope.
Cool. All right, so let's look at our friend Willie here real quick. This is our concept report for Willie. And we can see with the concept report, it tries to get really specific in terms of what different things they're working on. Now, in a not so distant future, you'll be able to actually click on these to get a little more information about the skill, but each of these align with skills that you can assign to students. Now, when I see one, I'm not really paying too much attention to that data, obviously, because that's just one time where they've tried it. But if I'm seeing more than that, I'm starting to have questions, right? So in terms of adjectives, in 5 different questions, he's gotten it wrong twice. Okay, so we're not seeing terribly consistent results here yet. When I'm looking at compound subjects, he's gotten this right 16 times. So this is a skill that he's mastered. So if I'm looking through this report with him, I'm going to say compound subjects, that is an area where you excel. Nice work. So then though, if I look at say parallel structure, he's gotten this wrong every single time and he's had a fair number of opportunities. So parallel structure might be an activity we go back and look at together. A few things to pay attention to. They will always have a 0% for spelling. We don't count it right every time they spell a word right. We only count it when they get it wrong. So 6 errors out of 147 sentences, not too shabby. If we're looking at 20 errors, maybe we're going to have a conversation about the fact that the words are right there on the page and you should check your spelling before you move on. Okay, so the concept report is a really great opportunity for me to think about individual conferences with students. The last report here is the Common Core Standard Report. Are you guys, are you Common Core aligned in the work that you do?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is an area where I can start to see overall how my students are doing with the standards I practice. Now, we do not show students standard level, and here's the reason for that. For example, produce, expand, and rearrange complete, simple, and compound sentences. We know this is a skill that some adults struggle with. So while it first shows up for students in 2nd grade, we don't put that number 2 next to it anywhere where the students can see. For you, this is helpful because you can see out of 2 opportunities to practice this Common Core standard, Charles or whoever I'm looking at right now has mastered that skill. Right? Great. Now, on the other hand, if I look at using coordinating and subordinating conjunctions, in 2 opportunities, he's averaging 61. So he's not really quite where we want him to be yet. So this is something that I want to look at in terms of those skills. Okay, so this report is one that I know folks have printed out often to attach to IEPs as sort of a place, to say, if I have a student who's supposed to be mastering 40% of standards, this is my indicator that they're mastering X% of standards when it comes to some of my writing work. The reports that are coming out that I'm super excited about, there will soon be a report that actually breaks down for each student their overall, the activity packs they've worked on, their scores on each of those activity packs, their overall scores on Quill, et cetera, et cetera. So you will have like a very easy progress report that you can print and share with students and parents, et cetera. So that's going to be a big thing that comes out very soon. And then there will be more and more ways for you to search the data as you go. that is it. We are at exactly 4 o'clock, and I have said a lot of words in your direction. So I'm just going to stop talking now and see what questions you have and what other things I can say to you.
No, the only ones I've already asked.
Yeah, I am one who needs to get in and do more playing around in Quill. This was a really great overview for me. So I'm looking forward to really digging in and exploring more of this.
Great. That's good to hear. So the last thing here, I'm going to re-screen share with you real quick. The last thing here is, this is my email address. And I would like for you to feel comfortable using it liberally and often. This email address is a great place for you to send feedback on the website. It's a great place for you to ask questions or let me know if you're having errors and things that need to be troubleshot. If I can't answer them right away, I will pass you off to one of my team members. We're a pretty small team. We're actually 9 folks, and we're lucky to have 3 interns right now. So a quarter of our staff is interns. But we do make sure that we respond to these things. Now, because we're such a small team, and we're open source, that means that anyone can build for us. We really rely a lot on your and your students' feedback. We don't get a chance to go through and edit every question 3,000 times. So if you notice an error or if a Quill Connect question isn't, the answer is correct and it's not being recognized, take a screenshot and send it in our direction. When you have a student who notices that, right, they notice that Quill is not correct, they have written a correct sentence following all the rules and Quill didn't recognize it, please have them screenshot it and send it our way. I like to send a personal thank you to students in those cases, just because I think that it's important for them to know that they can interact with the people who are creating the tools that they use and they have a responsibility to do that. So please feel free to email us, let us know what you're thinking. If there's something you really wish we had that we don't have, please, please, please reach out and let us know. As you said, you're going to go back, you're going to dig through. You'll get an email from me after this too, so you'll be able to respond to that. But, you're going to go dig through and you're going to end up with 17 questions. Send me all 17 and I'll send you an answer.
Thank you, Becca. That's wonderful.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Have a fabulous afternoon, and let me know if there's anything else I can do for you.
Great. Thank you again so much. Thank you for your patience with us and all of the information.
Yeah.
All right. Y'all take care.
You too.
See ya. Have a good one.
Bye. Bye-bye.